vinyl friends and vinyl community. It's Brian from Brian's Vinyl Records, and this is kind of like a response to Marichen's video. Marichen is a vinyl community member who goes under her name, and I will leave her channel below here so that you can check her out. But she recently did her studio ranking of Motley Crue's albums, and so I wanted to kind of do my version of that. It was one I was going to do at some point anyway, and it ties really well into my latest podcast series that is currently going on the death, resurrection, and reformation of Motley Crue. So please check that out. The link is below for the podcast, and check out our talk. We look at Vince Neil's Exposed album, the self-titled Motley Crue album, and Generation Swine. Those three pivotal albums that happened after the dissolution of the band and Vince Neil took place. And John Crosby was brought in as a singer and then let go, and Vince was brought back in. So we kind of look at that pivotal period in Motley Crue's career through those three albums. So check that out if you're so inclined. But here we go. I'm going to start with my list in my favorites order of Motley Crue. And the first one is an album that I don't actually own in any media format. The only time I ever bought it was a digital version of the album, and I can't even get access to that anymore because I bought it from iTunes, and they don't even have the rights to have it on there. So I lost access to the album itself. I have the files, but I can't play them. So anyway, that is the New Tattoo album. So if you're not familiar, this was the only album that was done without Tommy Lee on drums. He had been in legal trouble, eventually went to prison, and they ended up making the album with Randy Castillo, who played in several bands, including Ozzy Osbourne, a great drummer, and he filled in and played on the album. And then unfortunately he got cancer and he had to pull out of the tour. And they brought in Samantha Maloney to play drums for them, and they did a tour behind that album as well. It wasn't a big tour. They played a lot of smaller clubs, but they did release a video out there. I think it's called Lewd, Rude, and Tattooed or something like that you can get of that tour. It's pretty good. But anyway, that's probably my lowest ranked album from Motley Crue. It's just got really not a whole lot of memorable stuff on there. I love the title track, New Tattoo, and I really enjoy the lead single off that, which was Hell on High Heels. Those are classic Crue sounding songs. The rest of it's just kind of there. Nothing special, nothing, whatever. Next in my list would be Generation Swine. We are going to be reviewing this album, so I will have more in-depth information on this album itself in the podcast as it comes out in the next few weeks. So if you're interested in my full thoughts on this, there it is. But this would be right down there as far as Motley Crue albums go. For me, just not the greatest album. There's some good stuff on here, absolutely, but not my favorite album at all. Next would be Saints of Los Angeles. I actually really dig this album. I think it's a really good album. It's fun. This was originally, I think, supposed to be the soundtrack to The Dirt. That was what it was really written by. Nikki Sixx and his 6 a.m. partners, DJ Ashba and James Michael, they wrote all the songs on here for this, and it was going to be like the soundtrack to The Dirt, but that movie it went through a lot of issues before it was finally released. So they put it out as a Motley Crue album. And I think it's actually a pretty good album. It's a fun album, and it really just tells the story of the band, for the most part, coming up through the ranks in the LA scene and all that stuff. So, good album, but that is down at the bottom. Next up is Theater of Pain. Now, again, a lot of people give this album a lot of crap, and I don't understand it. I mean, it's not their best album, sure, but there's some fun stuff on here. I think this is actually a really good album in all. And, they were drugged out and all that stuff going on. But for me, I really like Fight for Your Rights. Home Sweet Home's a classic. I like Keep Your Eye on the Money. I like Louder Than Hell. I like Save Our Souls. In fact, the song I like the least is probably the song that actually made it off this album as a hit. And that's Smoking in the Boys' Room. And probably because I heard it so many freaking times that I just got sick of it. So, Motley Crue's Theater of Pain. Up next for me is Girls, Girls, Girls. Again, Nicky was in the throes of heroin addiction when he wrote this. There's some great stuff on here. Really good stuff on here. Girls, 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 Wild Side on here. just really good stuff. But it doesn't rank that high for me just because it's just not, you know, there's some really bad stuff on here too. I'll say that. But Girls, Girls, Girls would be next. After that is Motley Crue's Too Fast for Love, their debut album. Now, a lot of people would consider this their favorite Motley Crue album. They love the rawness of this album. It was, you know, a lot of times the first album from a band is really good because they've had years to work on the songs. They've played them over and over again by the time they actually get into a recording studio to put them down, so they're very familiar with the tunes. And, you know, this has got some really kick-ass tunes on it. Some really, really kick-ass tunes. So I really like this album a lot, but it's not my favorite from Motley Crue. Getting down to the final three here, we got Motley Crue's Shout at the Devil next. This was the album that really broke them. So Too Fast for Love got them in and onto the scene. This album broke them. Looks That Kill, Shout at the Devil, the title track is on here. This is the one that really put them on the scene as far as big acts and got them over. I believe this album is the one they toured with Ozzy, if I'm not mistaken. Might have been on this album here, and that gave them some really good exposure as well. So Shout at the Devil right up there at number 3. Number 2, Dr. Feelgood. This is the first album by Motley Crue that I actually owned and that I heard and really, really fell in love with this album. I think this is their most popular album as far as sales go. And for me, this is just filled with just killer tracks. Really, really enjoy this album quite a bit. I listen to this a lot. I still listen to this a lot. I think it's by far their best album with Vince Neil in the band. And yeah, I can't say enough about it. Just a really, really, really good album. Production is phenomenal on this. Bob Rock was brought in to produce this album, and his mark is all over this. It's just tight, wonderful. All the members were sober when they created this and recorded it, so I think that helped as well. Dr. Feelgood, number 2. And shocking to a lot of people, I'm sure, number 1 for me will always be the self-titled album with John Corabi. Now, you can say that this is not a Motley Crue album because Vince is not there, and the direction that the band went is completely opposite of anything they'd ever done. Now, in Mariken's video, she said that this was kind of a jab at Vince Neil. Not even at all. I know that they jabbed at him in interviews and things like that, but this was an exploration for them. This having Vince out of the band and bringing in John Corabi, who could also then play really well guitar and could also help write, opened them up to things that they could never do before. And that allowed them to be heavier, allowed them to explore different topics, and allow them to really grow, I would say, as a band. If you listen to this album and you listen to Tommy Lee on this album, you can tell that he was super into this, making this album, the songs that they were doing, and this version of the band, because his drumming is out of his mind. It is insane. It is so good and so in there at some of his best drumming. And Tommy Lee is one of the better drummers that have ever played in rock and roll music. This is a showcase of what he can do. I highly recommend, if you haven't listened to this in a long time, don't look at it necessarily as a Motley Crue album, but go in there and just listen to what they did, and all the guitars and all the drumming and everything in here. It feels like they had new energy on this. And an interesting note on this too is that the original title, working title for this, was Till Death Do Us Part. Now, a more fitting title, I think, for the album, and would definitely have been a jab at Vince Neil if they did keep that album. But unfortunately, they were forced to put this out as Motley Crue, and they just kept it as self-titled at that point. So I understand that it seems like it might have been a jab at Vince, but I don't think it was necessarily the case. But this is my favorite. I love this album. I think it's absolutely fantastic, and highly recommend, if you have not given this a listen recently, go listen with fresh, clean ears and let me know what you think about it, because I tell you, if you haven't heard this since it came out, it's going to sound way different, and it's one of these better albums that have been put out by a band. And if it wasn't labeled Motley Crue, I think this would have been a much better, much more accepted album. So there you go. That's my rankings of Motley Crue in response to Marichen and her rankings. Again, check her channel out below. I will leave a link to her channel and to the video she did on her Motley Crue rankings, so you can check that out. And yes, the podcast is available. Episode 1 is out currently, and episode 2 is coming out shortly. That's a 3-part series on the death, resurrection, and reformation of Motley Crue, when we look at Vince Neil's Exposed, Motley Crue's Self-Titled, and Generation Swine, and look at the history, a period of that time with Vince Neil leaving the band and coming back. And I think it's a very fun series, and I hope you will enjoy it. So that link is also below. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, keep spinning, Vinyl Friends.